Well, Mark, thanks for joining us. Immediate number of questions arise, I think, from that free practice session. The first of which is, it looks as if it's going to be wet tomorrow. So how would the teams have gone into this dry Friday FP and obviously going into qualifying for the sprint?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, other than obviously for tomorrow, the downforce level is going to be a factor. You tend to want to run more downforce if you thought it was definitely going to be wet. But whether they would compromise dry sprint quali for a wet sprint race, I'm not sure. I suspect that the teams further back would, because otherwise they're not going to get points, given that points only go down to eighth. For the teams further up, probably not, because qualifying is still more important. So that's an interesting one. Although, as I said previously, it's a circuit where you can set a similar lap time with a higher downforce by being quicker in sector two and sacrificing on the straight. So again, thinking about it, actually, that probably would push you to a slightly higher downforce level. But otherwise, it doesn't make an awful lot of difference, to be honest, because they're still trying to learn about the car for Sunday in particular. And given where the rules are these days, that you can't do an awful lot between the wet and the dry anyway. To my mind, there isn't really a huge effect that having a wet sprint race, possibly sprint main qualifying, would actually do, to be honest.
It was an interesting session, though. And you, the last time we spoke, you said you thought Mercedes could be looking good. And from the start and in the first phase of free practice, George Russell was really quick. So was Kimi Antonelli.
Yeah.
And Max was quick as well. But already on that hard tyre run at the beginning of free practice, there was a big difference in top speed between the Mercedes and the Red Bull. And then, I don't know if this is how you saw it, but then they went on to fuel runs. And the best comparison was indeed George Russell versus Max Verstappen, because McLaren seemed to be, if that's their fuel run time, they're sort of a second a lap quicker, which again is hard to believe. But if we do the direct comparison between George and Max, on the fuel run, Max's top speed was around 304, 305, and George's 313, 312 consistently over a long run. So first of all, what do you make of that difference in top speed? But then I got to put a rider on at the end, which is right at the end when everybody went out on mediums, except for Red Bull, who went out on softs at the end, and Ferrari, who were on hards. Max, on the lap he aborted, that one lap he did on the red tyre, was actually quickest through the speed trap at 323. And I'm wondering whether they took a lot of wing out of the car right at the end of free practice.
Yeah, so it looked like that Red Bull started with the weather in mind, a slightly higher downforce setup, but when they saw that their direct competitors were going quicker, they chose to pull some off at the end. Maybe there's also an engine mode factor in that as well, because as I've previously said, with limited number of laps available in your full power engine modes, they may have elected just to run that right at the end, and maybe combining that with the downforce level change gave them a big boost. But I think it will be a bit of a dilemma, because with the weather, as you said, coming up, and you could see the wind was having an effect coming from the southeast, I think it was, so making the entry to 12 a little tricky potentially, and giving you a tailwind as you come round that corner, making the car a bit unstable. It's all adding to the difficulties that they've got, and I think it's just exaggerating the McLaren's benefit, which we've seen before in medium speed corners. They obviously have a car which retains its strong front end mid corner, and that gives them the performance benefit. It means that they don't have to add on as much front end for the to get the car around those corners, as other people are probably trying to do, and those other cars are becoming more unstable on the other corner entries as a result. So it really is playing to the McLaren's balance benefit, I think.
And what you were saying about the different sectors and the run out of 12 onto the straight, I thought it was quite interesting during the fuel run with Max that GP got on the radio and said, Max, think about your line between turn 12 and turn 1. In other words, where he's flat out going up the hill and through the left.
I think that might be to do with bumps on the track. As you come round the sort of corners just before the actual what you might call the start-finish straight itself, there are some quite nasty bumps. And if you're running the car as low as possible, if the driver puts his car in the wrong place on the track, you're really going to wear the skids.
Right.
So I suspect it was more about a reminder to either come in as tight as possible or to run wider, whichever is better for him, to avoid the bumps, which are on what you might say is more the natural racing line. It was a problem we had last year, and we had to be very clear with our drivers where to place the car coming up the hill and round that bend just after the pit entry, because you can literally do, if you set your car low enough, you just make it through qualifying and the sprint race initially. If the driver goes wide by probably one car width and over those bumps, you can wipe all that out in one lap. So it makes a huge difference. So my suspicion is it was more to do with that than anything.
With obviously Q1, Q2 for the sprint qualifying on medium tyres, what did you make of Red Bull choosing to run softs at the end and Ferrari hards and everybody else mediums, which is kind of what you would expect, new sets of medium, just to get the feel of the car for Q1, Q2?
Yeah, I think I suspect that it's a function of the tyres are effectively too hard, aren't they, for the weekend? So I suspect the reason why most people who only run mediums is not just to be on mediums for SQ1 and SQ2, but also with a view to having more of the soft tyres for quali tomorrow in the afternoon, potentially. Red Bull, one just has to assume that they went in confident that their pace can carry over, and they really wanted to try and get the most out of the car in SQ3, but neither of them set a time on the soft tyre in the end, so it doesn't really seem to have paid off, which is a bit odd.
Yeah, it's a bit odd. Maybe you could say it's good homework because at least they know that. But bottom line is Max, halfway through the lap, just said he got no grip, basically, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's really odd.
It is odd, and maybe they had an inkling for some reason that this was going to be a problem, and they wanted to experience it. I mean, it certainly is. These sessions where you switch compounds are quite difficult because getting the balance correct between the medium and then the soft for Q3 it's not simple. And with the changing track grip levels, adding another factor in and any changing wind direction, it can be a big problem. So ideally, you'd have run the medium and the soft so you know what offset you need to apply. But I guess they biased it towards SQ3, being confident they'd get through the first two parts.
Jury's out then whether you continue to run mediums or a set of softs in Q3.
Well,
I guess.
Well, that will be the question now, won't it? Having seen that, but given that the tyres are at the harder end of the scale, it's very difficult to imagine that the medium is really the better tyre. I suspect it's just a question of can you get the balance right on the soft, and once you have, it's got to be the quicker tyre, I'd have said. But
we've been talking a lot in the build-up to this race about the Lando Norris balance of power with Oscar Piastri and tools in his toolbox. In Oscar's case, Oscar looked pretty good from the start. Right at the end, Lando got him, but very, very close. Yeah,
and I think, to be honest, Oscar will be quite confident because he set his time well before Lando did, and the track grip improvement in the last few minutes would have been reasonably significant. So it looks like he's pretty confident. Maybe it's because it's not a low grip track. I don't know, but I mean, I think Oscar's he's quite an enigma, isn't he? It's difficult to work out.
Well, he's turning into an enigma, that's for sure.
Yeah, but he's very cool. He plays it very cool. He never really shows what his thoughts are and what he's struggling with. And I think he did this earlier in the season. Lando had a run of good races, and then Oscar came back and dominated. I think, was it Montreal when he suddenly sort of showed he was back in contention again. So it does look a little bit like this. Maybe on this sort of circuit, with this preponderance of medium speed corners, a car that he's happier with the balance with, more in tune with, he's just getting his confidence back. Whereas maybe Lando has been a bit more adaptable at the previous tracks when the car hasn't been quite as nicely matched to the circuits. So I suppose on that basis, you still say that Lando probably is overall doing the better job, but when the car hits the sweet spot, Oscar gets his confidence back.
No changes to any of the cars coming into this race. No surprise there, really, I guess, at this stage
Yeah.
of the season. But just to finish now, as we look ahead into sprint qualifying, Ferrari, what do you make of their choice to run that hard tyre at the end, and how do you think they looked in general?
I think that's really, I think that's really odd, I have to say. I think that's a mistake because they're not going to learn much about the car come sprint quali. And if you start sprint quali on the back foot, that's going to put you in a bad spot for quali on Saturday afternoon, unless it's wet, of course. The question is, why have they done that? I don't think teams are going to need the hard tyres come the race, so there's a thought that you get rid of it. I guess what they wanted was not to burn a new soft because of needing them for quali tomorrow, potentially. They didn't want to burn a new medium because they wanted new mediums for quali today and potentially the sprint race if it's dry. But I am quite surprised that I don't think anyone's ever done that before, not in my knowledge. So I find that very difficult to justify, I'll be honest, because the hard tyre, when it's too hard, which I think it is for this track, is really going to throw you in terms of what balance you need. So both their drivers will have come through that session dealing with very low grip, and I don't think they're really going to have a good handle on what they need for sprint quali.
Interesting.
It'll be interesting to see. Maybe it's a master stroke that we haven't figured out, or I haven't figured out, but I am struggling with that one, I have to say.
Well, that's the beauty of Formula One. We'll see. Mark, thanks so much for your input. We'll look forward to sprint qualifying. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.